Hey there, folks. It's Jay Frost speaking to you from Command Central at the Philanthropy Mastermind series. So happy to have you back here. Of course, this is our How to Raise show, which we launched just this year as a way to make sure that you knew where to go when it came to fundraising training. So this is part of something we've been doing, of course, since 2016, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment. But I want to tell you how thrilled we are to have you here to the CFRE accredited series and to this session, How to Plan a Successful Capital Campaign in Challenging Times. I'm going to introduce our presenter to you in just a moment, but first I want to welcome you here, and particularly want to welcome, I guess it was Susie, who was first in the chat. So thank you for leading the crowd there. We appreciate it when people do say hello, not only to us, but to one another. And if you haven't joined them yet, please do go ahead to the chat and say hello, maybe which part of the country or the world you're from, perhaps which organization you're with. All of that's wonderful for all of you. And also it's terrific for our presenter to give her some context for what she's going to share with you today, so she'll know who's here in the crowd. So thank you all for that. Another way you can participate, of course, is the Q&A. You all know how this works with Zoom. You'll find it typically at the bottom of your screen, and I want to encourage you to utilize that throughout. We'll make sure to pull from that probably during the presentation. Our presenter is very accustomed to not only sharing with you and teaching, but engaging with you. So I'm sure that she will be monitoring the chat and Q&A, and then we'll both come on camera at the conclusion of the presentation and be able to facilitate some of those questions that may have occurred to you throughout. So do use the chat and the Q&A, and we'll make sure to address as much of that as possible today while we're here together. I also want to encourage you to take part in this survey. It's our one and only way to find out what you want to see and hear. So all you need to do is wait until you're about to sign out. And when you do, you'll be presented with a survey. Please do fill it out. And if you have anything you want to tell us about this series as a whole, those comments are extraordinarily helpful. Both what you want to see and hear in the future, the guests you'd like to see, but also what you thought about things so far. That all feeds into our programming for the months ahead. And then finally, the question that people inevitably ask, will there be slides and a recording? I'm going to turn, of course, to our guest presenter today about the slides in a moment. But for the recording, we are recording right now, and we will make sure a copy of that recording is available to you after the session. It'll be posted both to the site of our sponsor, DonorSearch, as well as to the DonorSearch YouTube channel. So we'll make sure there are links to a lot of that in the chat throughout today, directly from our producer, Jack. I do want to thank our sponsor, DonorSearch, as well, the world leader in AI and donor research solutions for the nonprofit sector. DonorSearch has been generously supporting this series since 2016, as I said before, 650 programs to date, and much of the last 2 years are available on the DonorSearch website and YouTube channel, where you can learn also about your own donors. So not a bad thing to know. Now, today, our presenter, of course, is Amy Eisenstein. She's one of the few people who have that ACFRE next to her name, which means she's one of the top people in the field of fundraising, and she's got the alphabet soup next to her name to prove it. But you probably already know who she is, but just in case you don't, she's a nationally recognized expert in capital campaigns, what she's talking about today, and major gift fundraising, which she speaks about very frequently. She's the CEO and co-founder of Capital Campaign Pro. Look it up. We'll make sure to include a link in the chat, where she helps nonprofits of all sizes raise millions of dollars through strategic campaign planning. With over 25 years of experience, Amy's worked as both a development director and a fundraising consultant, serving organizations such as Shelter Our Sisters, Rutgers, New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, and many, many more. And since 2008, she's dedicated her career to coaching nonprofit leaders like you through the challenges of fundraising. And her expertise has earned her, of course, that designation I mentioned earlier, which is available to only, I think, slightly over 100 people worldwide. She's a sought-after speaker, an award-winning consultant, and the author of several fundraising books, including Major Gift Fundraising for Small Shops. She served on the board of AFP New Jersey, including 2 years as president, and was recognized with the Award for Consulting Excellence in 2019. I'm really grateful to have back to the series Amy Eisenstein. Amy?
Oh, thanks, Jay. What a nice introduction. All right. Well, hello and welcome. It's so nice to see you here from all corners of the country and the world. and we are going to just go ahead and dive right in because what we're talking about today is important, and that is really thinking about how to plan a capital campaigns in uncertain or challenging times. And no doubt today, these days are challenging for sure. So let's talk about first, open that chat box back up. If you put it down, mine sort of disappeared. Here it's back up. I want to know where you are in your campaign. So are you just thinking about it? You can just type in A, B, C, D, E. Are you in pre-campaign planning? Are you in feasibility study? Are you soliciting gifts? Maybe you're planning the next one. So excuse my cursor as I run around the screen here. Okay. Oh, we've got people getting ready, thinking about a campaign, planning a campaign, ready for the next one. All right. Okay. But regardless of where you are in your campaign planning and preparation, we can all agree these are challenging times for nonprofit organizations and for fundraisers. And so the question is, as you ramp up for your campaign and as you go through your campaign, how do you navigate these challenging and uncertain times? Okay, so I just wanted to share a little bit about us really briefly and tell you how to find me. Thank you so much for Jack for putting in Capital Campaign Pro's website into the chat box. So you can find me at amy@capitalcampaignpro.com and learn more about us on our website. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So what I want to say, and I'm going to say again and again throughout the hour, is do not hit the brakes on your campaign. You may need to go back and do a little more planning, have a little more discussion, check in with your donors, but don't hit the brakes because the chances are high that your case for support is either just as strong now or stronger than it ever was before. I mean, there's plenty of organizations now where their case for support, your case for support, and tell me in the chat, is your case for support now amplified by what's happening with the change in administration or what's going on in the world? So my guess is that your case is strong or stronger than it was a few short weeks ago. I want to say that and remind you actually that donors are generous, and we see that time and time again. So whether it was after 9/11 or during the crash and recession of 2008, whether it was through the global pandemic that we all just came through, donors are generous when there is in good times and bad. And, you know, they step up, they rise to the challenge, they step up to the plate. And the fact is that the rich are getting richer. And so campaigns are about big gifts primarily. First and foremost, they're about lead donors. And we're going to talk through what that looks like and what that means and why that is. But people who have the financial ability to give 6- and 7-figure gifts over the past few years and likely in the next few years are getting wealthier. And so if you have the thought that, oh, times are hard because they're hard for you or your clients, it may not be the case for your donors. What we saw in COVID, so let's just go back. Oh my gosh, 5 years. It's going to be 5 years in March, isn't it? So let's go back to March 2020, the spring of 2020, the summer of 2020, and all these nonprofit organizations that had been planning for and preparing for and getting ready for capital campaigns had to make a decision. And every single day, I talked to people who decided to hit the brakes on their campaigns. They said, oh my gosh, it's COVID. We need to stop fundraising. And they are just starting with their campaign now that they had been planning in 2019. And it's five years later, and they're just getting started. The organizations that took a deep breath, had the courage to move ahead, they are long finished with their campaigns. So, I mean, sort of that's what I mean by time kills all deals, right? Everybody's worried about construction costs going up. Well, let me just say yes. And your campaign may or may not include a building or a renovation, but if it does, costs are going up. And, time doesn't help you waiting and waiting and being nervous and putting it off. So I just want to say, don't hit the brakes. What you want to do, actually, there are tons of things to do, and that is communicate with your donors. And in fact, in uncertain times and challenging times, it's actually time to over communicate with your donors. So check in with them on a regular and ongoing basis. Let them know what's going on. Let them know that you're not totally sure what's going on or what may happen or what the future may hold, but you're working on it. You're talking to people. You're making contingency plans. And so, to me, it is about proceeding with your campaign. If your case still applies and it's as strong or stronger than ever, then don't hit the brakes on your campaign. And that's going to be some of our themes for today, but we're really talking about how to plan for a successful campaign in good times and bad. And I'll be sprinkling in what to do in uncertain times because that's what we're in now. All right. So one of the key factors in planning a successful campaign is engaging your donors early. So if you plan your campaign with with your executive director, your development director, and your board president, and you don't engage sort of further circles out, and you keep it really close to the vest and only the insiders of the insiders. And then you make plans and you make plans and you make plans. And then you go ask for gifts. You're going to catch people off guard. They're not going to be prepared to make big gifts. They're not going to be on board. They're not going to be insiders. They're not going to be engaged. So to me, really successful organizations, really successful campaigns engage their donors early and every step along their way in the campaign. And it becomes even more important to do that well in challenging times, in uncertain times. So engage your donors in the process and in what's going on and, your fears and your hopes and your dreams and your vision. And I think that a tendency during challenging times or, you're not going to make the budget or, whatever's happening, the tendency is, oh my God, don't tell donors or, I don't want to bother donors. Have you ever thought that, right? I don't want to bother them because, then they might not give me the big gift. Well, donors actually want to be engaged. They want to know what's going on. They want to be involved. They want to be consulted. So we're going to talk about opportunities to engage your donors early and often throughout the campaign and the campaign planning we're actually going to focus on. Okay, so let's look at some campaign phases and how they relate to donor engagement and a donor engagement strategy. And before I talk about this slide, actually, Jay said it, but I want to reiterate that if you have a question or if I use jargon or say something that you don't understand, go ahead and stick it in the Q&A box. So open your Q&A box now. I'm happy to answer questions throughout. And especially if I say something that you don't understand or that doesn't make sense or you have a question about. So I want to think about campaign phases along the way, starting here with number 1, pre-campaign planning, which is before we get into a feasibility study, which is frequently when people think about the beginning of a campaign. Then finalizing your campaign plan. We're going to go through these phases, these first 3 phases about getting ready for a campaign in detail. And then in the quiet phase, this is where you raise the bulk of your money. This is where you raise 70, 80, sometimes even 90% of the dollars you need for your campaign before you kick off and go public. And so when you're thinking about a campaign and a committee structure, I think of committees as opportunities to engage donors early, both committees and individual outreach. But instead of thinking about a campaign committee as this one massive overarching committee that works with your organization and you have to recruit a zillion people to from the minute you start planning till the end when you celebrate and are collecting pledges, I like to think of a committee structure as a series of subcommittees or ad hoc committees that come in and out of play during each phase of the campaign. And let me explain a little bit. In the quiet phase, when I'm soliciting or you're soliciting the biggest gifts for your campaign, that takes a certain kind of volunteer and a certain kind of person who is competent and confident and capable and willing to solicit the big gifts that you need for your campaign. So having a person who loves to plan events in your quiet phase committee or your leadership gifts committee here doesn't make any sense. And likewise, having someone who really is a great solicitor on your kickoff committee or on your public phase committee makes no sense. So really using volunteers when and where their skills are going to be used, engaging people. The data we've found is that engaged volunteers give bigger gifts. So if you when you get to the end of your campaign, I want you to look back and see who the donors were. And you'll see that the people who gave the biggest gifts to your campaign often are those people who served on committees, who were active volunteers. So we want to structure a campaign as a whole bunch of series of opportunities to engage donors early, in committee and outside of committees. All right. Okay, so I'm looking at a question that just popped up. If you have come into a new role at an organization and inherited a capital campaign with little or no financial or prospect planning, what would you suggest doing first to help things get back on track, especially since the campaign has already kicked off? You know, you're going to have to go through some sort of reassessment period. And I think that question is so specific and so detailed and so nuanced, depending on the situation, that I would be happy to engage with you about that at a different time. But it's right. You're asking a really smart question. If the campaign wasn't planned well from the jump, as my teens would say, from the get-go, what is that? What do you do? And I would say sort of a timeout and reassessment and in talking to who's there, the board chair, some of the lead donors, maybe even a little mini feasibility study to go talk to people and get a sense of what can happen, what has happened, and get consensus on where you should go from here. All right. So I'm going to take a little bit of a deep dive into those first three phases of how to engage donors. To me, during these uncertain times, it is absolutely critical that you have buy-in from your biggest potential donors about your plans, your planning, your campaign. And so having a communication strategy, an outreach strategy, and providing opportunities for them to give regular feedback will help you be successful in a campaign. So let's take a look at pre-campaign planning. So here in pre-campaign planning, you are going to be developing the project plans. What are you raising money for? What are your campaign objectives? How much do those cost, right? How much does your project plan, do your project plans cost and your campaign objectives? And that's how you get a working goal. So sometimes I'll hear people say, we want to raise $50 million because it's our 50th anniversary. And I'll say, well, what are your next 50 years or, what do your next 10 years look like? And how much does that cost to fulfill the mission? Not fulfill the mission, the vision of this campaign, right? So that your working goal is tied to your project plans and your campaign objectives. And your working goal is a draft goal. Think about it as a draft goal. It's a goal that you're working towards, and you won't solidify that. You'll have an opportunity to adjust the goal up or down after the feasibility study, and also again after the quiet phase before you kick off and go public. And that's actually why you want to keep the goal a working goal and do a quiet phase, so that you're not publicizing your goal until you're well on your way to success, and then you can officially announce a campaign goal. So in the pre-campaign planning, so listen, let me share some opportunities for donor engagement, early donor engagement here, right? In the making of the project plans, you might go to some key donors, I hope you do, early on and say, listen, we're thinking about buying property. We want to expand. We need more space. But as an organization, we've never purchased property before. If maybe one of your donors is in real estate, and you can ask their advice about that and engage donors early. Or you might go to other donors and say, you're a big muckety muck in our community. Who should we be talking to about thinking about buying property? What are the things, or you've worked on other campaigns before. How should we think about setting our campaign up? What advice do you have? So you might go to some big donors and say, you know what, I know you've been involved in other campaigns. What advice would you give us as we start to think about our campaign plans or our projects? And then it's time to potentially hire a consultant. So that's another thing. You could go to 3 or 4 or 5 potential donors and say, listen, you've volunteered with other organizations before and worked with campaign consultants. Do you have any advice or recommendations about who we might talk to? What questions we might ask? So really engaging your donors early, and your early case for support drafts, right? Share it around, say, give us some early feedback, even before we go into feasibility. You'll do this some of this in a more formal and structured way in a feasibility study, but getting buy-in and advice early is only going to benefit you and your campaign. Okay. So another question came in. What if your board disagrees with the goal of your feasibility study found a pathway for? So I think the question is, what if your feasibility study, what if you tested a goal of $10 million and your feasibility study comes back, disappointing with $6 million, right? And what I would say to that is a couple of things. One is, it's better to go into a campaign with data so that you can make informed decisions than pretending that there isn't the reality and plunging ahead with a project that you're actually not going to be able to fund. So a couple of other things. One is, we actually encourage you to test high. We think of a campaign as an opportunity to raise the most you can raise in this moment for the particular project that you're working on. And if you start low, it's harder to go high. And if you start high, it's not a problem actually to scale back. So you should plan your big vision. What would you do? Here's the vision with specifics if you raise $10 million or $50 million. And then you come back and you say, okay, our study showed that maybe we can't raise as much as we thought. So first, we're going to look for alternative funding sources. I sometimes say government funding. That may not be the case right now. You look for, have we considered financing? Just because our project costs this much and we can raise this much doesn't mean we can't do the project. Lots of organizations should consider financing. Or maybe you have reserves at your organization that, it's not your first choice to spend them, but you may decide to do that once you test the feasibility study. And then you also may scale back the project or phase it. So you're working with information and data and able to make good decisions. And instead of not knowing. All right, I'm going to keep going and we'll get to some more questions as we go through. Okay, so in pre-campaign planning, all of these are opportunities to engage donors. You're planning the project and campaign objectives, checking in or putting together little subcommittees as you determine the working goal. Hiring a consultant, you can put together a little committee to help you interview and vet and select the right consultant for your organization. As you draft the case for support, getting feedback, early feedback on draft. Make sure you put draft on it big so that everybody knows it's not the final. And as you develop some of these tools, your gift range chart, which is your table of gifts, we're going to look at that. And as you put together your depth chart, which is a pipeline of prospects, you can check in with different donors that have those different skill sets. Okay. So that was pre-campaign planning, early opportunities to engage donors. You know, and you know that before you ask for a lead gift or a big gift, you want to have multiple touches with your biggest potential donors. And so these are opportunities that are built into campaign strategy and campaign planning to do that. That's exactly why you do some of this stuff. Okay. Phase 2 is feasibility study. And I believe that most organizations significantly benefit from doing a feasibility study early on before they start asking for gifts and as as a launching pad for their campaign. And you know, as a consultant, you can say I'm biased, right? But I'm going to tell you why I think they benefit. And also, I get calls weekly from organizations similar to that first question. They're stuck. They're in the middle of a campaign. They raised a third or even 2/3 and they're stuck and they don't know why. And the first question I'm going to ask them as a campaign consultant when they call me is, did you do a feasibility study? Did you have a consultant help you get ready or make your campaign plans? And 9 times out of 10, when they're stuck, the answer is no. They didn't do good planning. They didn't engage their donors. They didn't plan well. They don't know campaign strategy, and then they're stuck. And it's obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, it's much harder to get an organization unstuck in the middle of a campaign that hasn't been planned well than it is to run a successful campaign when planned well from the beginning. Okay. Feasibility study. This is an opportunity to test your plans, your specific plans with your lead donors. Now, I say that because sometimes people are confused about what a feasibility study does or is. And I know that there's confusion and thinking that a feasibility tells you how much you can raise in a vacuum. So people will come and say, can you do a feasibility study and tell us how much we can raise? And that isn't the right question. And the answer is no, we can't. What a feasibility study does is test a specific plan. So are you expanding your programs, your outreach? Will you serve more people? Does it involve a building? You know, will you need to hire more staff? What is the vision? What are the campaign objectives? And how much does that cost? And that's something that you can go out and test with donors. If you were more in a vacuum, more vague about it, and went to donors and said, how much do you think we can raise? Donors don't know. They can't answer that question. But if you say, this is the specific project, these are the details, this is how we're thinking about it, will you help? Will you support it? Are you excited? Do you think others would be excited? They can answer those questions. So it really assesses the giving potential and gives you feedback and engages people, a well-done feasibility study. Okay. So now let's talk about where the money will come from, which is going to help you see why a feasibility study is so critical for success. So if you haven't been through a campaign before, you may not have thought about it this way before, but more than 50%, and I would argue often closer to 70% of the money will come from your top 20 donors. Think about that. So in challenging times, in uncertain times, your opportunity, your challenge is to go out and really engage these top 20 donors that are likely to give you between 50 and 70% of your campaign goal. And they are not struggling financially right now. It's unlikely. It's likely that they're doing fine. When lots and lots of people were struggling during the pandemic, we turned to organizations that were providing cleaning products and solutions. They weren't doing badly. They were raking in the cash. Anybody that was making medical protective devices, they weren't doing badly. So really just looking around, what sectors, there's always people in different times that are doing fine. And right now, the people that are going to give you those 6- and 7-figure gifts based on the stock market are doing okay. All right, so here's a basic gift range chart. It's just for $1 million, but you can add zeros. This works for whether you're doing a campaign for $1 million or $10 million or $100 million. And I want to point your attention first to this yellow row at the top here and show you how this chart works if this is the first time you're looking at something like this. So in this first column here, we're seeing number of gifts in descending order. The first gift that you need, the lead gift to your campaign, should be about 25% of your campaign goal, so $250,000. But going across the yellow row at the top, we need 2 prospective donors to be confident that if we think we have 2 prospects who could and might, we have good reason to believe they could financially and they might give us $250,000, then we can say, okay, we can probably raise 1 gift at that level. And as you go down, of course, in the first column, you need more gifts of smaller gift sizes, right? And if you go to the second column, it goes in descending order, right? The gifts start large and get smaller as you go down. So in the lead gift category, remember we were talking about 20 gifts. So 20 gifts. In this example, I'm going to say it gets us to 70% of our goal because we see that over and over again. And to get to this goal, we need 50 prospects. So to get to our 20 lead gifts, we need to identify 50 prospective donors. Okay, so the question is, who's going to make those gifts? So that, to me, is your opportunity and challenge and what a feasibility study really forces you to do. But who's going to make those gifts? So donors who have the ability to give those kind of gifts, 6- and 7-figure gifts, they have to believe in your mission, right? So when somebody around your boardroom table says, how about Oprah? Okay, Oprah meets the first criteria. She has the ability to give whatever size gift you're looking for. But does she believe in your mission? Is she even familiar with your organization or aware of your organization? I've been fundraising for, close to 30 years and been speaking for 15 years to groups. And only one time did somebody say they had contact with Oprah, like they actually knew her. So you have to be able to contact donors, right? In addition to, they have to have the ability to give, they have to believe in your mission or your cause and your organization, and they have to have some contact with somebody, meaning you have to have their cell phone number, you have to have their email address, they have to be likely to respond. Maybe they don't call you back on the first call, or maybe even the second. But if somebody calls them from your organization, maybe it's a board member, maybe it's the executive director, they will call you back, right? And we're talking about individuals, foundations, and corporations. These are primarily people who are already giving to your organization. And maybe right now they're only giving $1,000. And we see it all the time. People will come to me and say, nobody's ever given us $1 million. I don't know how we can do a campaign of, 10 or $15 million. We don't have any $1 million donors. And of course you don't. First of all, you've never had a multi-million dollar idea before. And you've never asked for $1 million gift. You've never had the reason to, the cause to, they've never had the motivation to. So don't worry about that yet. Your largest and most loyal donors are likely already in your donor database. And remember, this is about 20 people right now at the beginning of your campaign. It's not about hundreds of donors. It's not about thousands of donors. It's about combing through the donors that you have and people in your community who could give these big gifts. And really what your job is to find 50 names and with the idea of getting those 20 gifts. So major donors in your community, current and former board members. So this is the capital campaign formula. Honestly, this is the roadmap to your campaign. If you can follow this, you can have a successful campaign. We'll start from the bottom up. Find 50 prospects or potential donors that have the ability and the inclination, the potential interest in giving you those lead gifts. That 50 prospects need to result in 20 gifts that get you to 50, 60, 70% of your goal. So the idea is to talk to your leadership level donors early and get their buy-in and engagement. And that's what a feasibility study is. Okay, so those 50 prospects, that's who we're talking about. Let's talk about feasibility study benefits. And there's somebody at your organization right now who's saying, let's not do a feasibility study. We know we need to do a campaign, so let's just do it. Let's just start. And here's what you're going to say to them, to those people, and say, listen, I know we have to do it and we're going to do a campaign. A feasibility study was misnamed. I wish it was called a campaign planning study or a campaign readiness study. Then everybody would do it. Nobody would skip it. So let's make a pledge right now to change the name. But the common parlance in the sector, unfortunately, is feasibility study. So everybody thinks that a feasibility study tells them whether or not they can do a campaign. And the truth is, a feasibility study tells you how to do a campaign and gives you a realistic estimate of what you can raise. So that if you're planning a project for $100 million, but $70 million is more realistic, I mean, then you need to make alternative plans. You can't plunge ahead with a $10 million project, but you only raise $6 million. You don't want to find that out 3 years from now. I want to find out at the beginning, not at the end, that we can't raise the money, so that we can make alternative plans. Okay, so a feasibility study benefits. It engages prospective donors early. That if you don't take anything else away from this session today, that's the takeaway, is that if you engage your biggest potential donors early, you're going to have a successful campaign, a more successful campaign than you would otherwise. Now, the key is that in a feasibility study, a lot of the work is actually in identifying who are those 50 people. Who are those 50 people that could give you, 20% of the lead 20 gifts, right? Because if you interview too many people who do not have the potential to make 6- and 7-figure gifts, your results will be disappointing. Let me just say that again. If you interview the wrong people for your feasibility study, you will get disappointing results, because if you just include people who really can't make six-figure gifts. They might give 25,000. Of course, the results are gonna be that you can't raise the big bucks. So the challenge, the opportunity, as I've already said a few times, is to take the time and find those people who can help make your campaign successful. Feasibility studies force you to focus on those top few donors because you can't interview hundreds of people. There's no time or resources to do that. So it forces everybody to slow down and say, who are the people that really need to be included in this study and who can make or break our campaign? Otherwise, you won't take the time to figure out who those people or foundations are. A feasibility study allows you to make data-informed decisions instead of sort of hoping, oh, we need to raise $10 million, so let's just go out and do it. Okay, that's one strategy. It clarifies your strengths and weaknesses. It provides outside perspective because you're going to be talking to 30 of your biggest potential donors who are outside the most inner circle of your organization. So you're going to hear lots of opinions and feedback and things that you haven't thought of. And it gives the board confidence to move ahead with the campaign. Because if you're asking your board members right now, should we do a campaign? Can we do a campaign? You're asking them to vote to move ahead with a campaign. Can we? And so basically, you're asking your board to say, can we raise $10 million? They don't know. How would they know? But if you talk to your biggest potential donors and they say, we're on board, we'll help, we'll support you, your board can breathe a collective sigh of relief and say, okay, we can move ahead with the campaign because we've talked to our 30 top prospective donors and enough of them or most of them said that they're on board and they'll help. Okay. So I want to talk about two ways to do a feasibility study. One I call the new model. We call it the guided feasibility study at Capital Campaign Pro, and the old model. Or the traditional model. So the key difference in these two models is who interviews the donors. Everything else is the same. So in this new guided model, the organizational leaders, you, the CEO, the executive director, the development director, maybe the board chair, interviews your donors. And in the old model, a consultant interviews the donors. So let me just put a little more detail in here. In this new model, the focus is on building donor relationships because you are in the room with your donors, and the interviews are fully transparent. You know who said what because you're in the room. A well-done model of this kind really takes the time to train organizational leaders on how to have these strategic conversations with their top donors. And it builds the confidence of the team and makes stronger fundraisers. It also builds board confidence for reasons we just touched on and provides a natural path to solicitation because this is the ultimate cultivation conversation. You're talking with your donors and getting their advice and feedback before asking them for the biggest gift they've ever given to your organization. Okay, the old model, it doesn't build donor relationships because you're sending a consultant in to talk to your donors. The interviews by nature and by design are confidential. So you don't know who said what, and you're getting aggregated data. So what that means is that these consultants you're sending in to talk to your donors, they draw criticism. They're asking for concerns from these people about your campaign plans. And there's no recourse because you get back a report that said 3 people are unhappy with these plans or don't like something that's going on at your organization, but you don't know who said what. So nobody gets back to these people. It's really problematic with this old model. The good news is it does build board confidence because consultants, have been doing this for many years. So it builds board confidence, but there is no natural path to solicitation because you haven't been in the room with your donors. But I will tell you that both models, so this guided model here, Just because you are doing the interviews doesn't mean it's a do it yourself. You need a consultant to set up the process, to provide the strategy, to provide the structure, to help figure out who to interview, to provide training for the structure and the arc of the conversation, to provide data collection tools. Your consultant's still going to analyze the data, and collectively you will make recommendations on how to move forward. So, okay. So that's feasibility study. And let's talk quickly about the final campaign plan before you start asking for money. So this is the third opportunity to engage your donors along the way in setting up your campaign plan. So here you're going to adjust your plans based on what you learned in the feasibility study. You're going to revise your working goal. And I have to be honest with you, I see working goals go up just as often as I see them come down. So I think a lot of people are afraid to do a feasibility study because they're worried that they can't raise the money, but often we'll raise the working goal after a feasibility study. So you discover that people are really excited about your vision and your plan, and everybody's on board. Amazing. But the truth is that even if you lower your goal, to me, that is not a bad outcome. That is helping you plan a realistic and successful campaign and project. It may not be the gold project that you were hoping for, but going ahead and starting construction or starting to plan, and then only getting 2/3 of the way to your goal and then not knowing what to do, it's not a good outcome. So better to know up front. So finalizing the case for support and developing the campaign plan. So to me, the opportunity here is to go back to the donors you interviewed and tell them what you found and show them your final campaign plan. Maybe not every single piece of this, but as you finalize your campaign plans, it is an opportunity to get feedback and input from both the people you interviewed in the feasibility study and even engage a few other donors and say, hey, listen, we went through this process. We've modified our plans. We've got our pretty final case for support and our working goal and our gift range chart and our budget and our timeline and our campaign policies and our committee structure and even our donor recognition plan. And before we finalize it, give us your feedback. We want your feedback. So this is just another touch, another engagement tool, another engagement opportunity for you and your donors. Okay, so I'm going to leave the last 9 minutes or so for questions. I do want to give you the timeline that I showed and a checklist, a step-by-step guide for your campaign. So if you want to get that, it's free. You can download it. I'll give you a few seconds while I turn to some of these questions. So Jennifer's asked, when do you recommend that construction starts in the campaign timeline? We have different opinions on our board. So Jennifer, there is no one size fits all for every organization. It really varies from organization to organization. So your board is going to need to come to consensus and discuss the pros and cons of when you can start construction. So if an organization has a lot of reserve, then they may only decide that they need to raise 50% of their goal before they're going to go ahead and start construction. Because the truth is that even if they don't get to their fundraising goal for the campaign, they can still do the project. They have the money in the bank. Other organizations may say, we are not going to start construction. We're not going to put a shovel into the ground until we have 80 or 90% of the fund or 100% of the funds raised. So there are ways to have that discussion. And a good experienced campaign consultant can help your board navigate that conversation. All right, I'm going to pull this down actually, and then answer more questions. So if you have other questions, there's a few more, but go ahead and put it in the chat or in the Q&A box, I should say. Okay. All right. So Rachel's asked, what do you suggest for an organization that is really new, hasn't started basic fundraising until recently, and is working towards a large $100 million capital campaign. Rachel, that is ambitious. I expect that you have an enormous vision. And I would say that it is harder to raise money when you don't have any donors. It's going to take you a little longer, perhaps. Listen, if you have a donor or two who are each going to give you $50 million, then it may not be hard at all. It may be easy. If you don't have a sense of who your donors are going to be or where the money is going to come from, it's going to take a lot more planning and strategy. So I think, there's so many variables there. And usually we're working with organizations that at least have some history of fundraising and some donor pools built up. People need to be confident that you are going to accomplish what you say you're going to accomplish. So as a new organization, asking people to give you, $20 million, which you're going to need as a lead gift, or $30 million, they're going to have to be, they're going to have to be pretty confident that you're able to carry out this mission. Okay. Lots of questions coming in now. Okay. Somebody's asking, do you have specific activities or characteristics of volunteers for each stage of the campaign that you might be looking for? Sure. I mean, I think one thing that I'm always looking for in volunteers is that they follow through and that they do what they say they're going to do. And then you'll need different volunteers for different points in your campaign because there's so many roles to play. I'd love to ask in the chat, what do you look for in volunteers? So I'm going to crowdsource this answer. But volunteers that do what they say they're going to do and follow through. That to me is the number one criteria, but I'm curious what other people will say. All right, so let me look at the questions here. Okay, great. Susie, can it be a combination of guided and traditional feasibility study? I would be concerned that feedback may not be as candid with staff as a consultant. Is there usually an option for someone not to be anonymous in the consultant's report? So Susie, it's such a good question because I think the mantra in the field from consultants is that donors will be more open and honest if the feasibility study conversations are confidential. And 7 years ago, before we started doing this new model, I might have agreed with that. And honestly, I wasn't sure if this new model was going to work. I had this feeling that leaving nonprofit leaders out of the process wasn't benefiting the donors or the organizations or the nonprofit leaders, which is why we developed this new model and have been talking about it for the last 7 years. But we have now been doing this model for 7 years, and we've done it with over 100 organizations. And other consultants are starting to do it too, which I'm thrilled to see because it is a better model. And we hope that other consultants pick it up. And I can tell you with 100% confidence and certainty that donors love to talk to nonprofit leaders. And if they're asked questions appropriately, to give open and honest feedback so that organizational leaders can plan successful campaigns. I mean, you can say something like, if we don't know what your concerns are, or knowing your concerns will help us plan a more successful campaign, right? So please feel free to be honest. Donors love to talk about what their concerns are, what they are upset about, and they love to talk directly to the nonprofit leaders. And I actually was talking to one of our clients recently, and he said, look, I was skeptical about this feasibility study model. I wasn't sure. And now that I've done the interviews, I have to tell you that if a consultant had been in the room and I hadn't been there, and the consultant came back and told me that these were the concerns, I wouldn't have believed the consultant. But I was there. I heard it firsthand myself. So anyways, okay. All right. So Nate's asking if the organization will use 20 million towards a 65 million campaign. Can we include, well, Nate, I think I need more information. Can we include that as a gift? Oh, so the organization is putting $20 million in towards a $65 million campaign and trying to raise 45 million. I just figured it out. So there's an important distinction to make between the project cost and the campaign goal. So let's pretend you're building a hospital wing, a cancer center, and it costs $100 million. The philanthropy piece of that may be about 20 million out of the 100 million, because the hospital will use fee for service and reserves and financing. There's lots of ways that the project gets funded, and you're asking about organizational reserves, but that's not the philanthropy piece. And you wouldn't want to have that as the lead gift, because then you just miss an opportunity to ask someone for a lead gift. So I would have a $45 million campaign, even if the project costs 65 million. Because then it sets up your donor recognition opportunities appropriately, and your lead gift doesn't get skewed. Okay, so many questions, Jay. What should I do? Our time's up. Should I continue answering questions? You know what? You can email me your questions, and I'm happy to talk to you.
I was just going to say that we don't want to cut you off, and we certainly don't want to cut the folks here off, but maybe could you again share how people can reach you,
Yes.
Amy?
Yeah, the best way. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Please. And then also about the slides, because I know people ask for them, but do you want people to reach out to you for a copy of a PDF or something like that?
No, do you and Jack has just put my email. If you could send the slides to everybody, that would be super helpful for me. I will send the PDF. Yeah.
Okay.
But Jack just sent my email address, and of course I'd be happy to talk to anybody about their campaign and how we might be able to help and answer any questions that you have.
And there is a point here from Jennifer who says, do a part two. This was a
Jack,
great session.
it's spelled wrong. Hold on. My email address, CAPITAL. I think it's OL. You put capital.
That's the problem with being around Washington. Yes, that's Capital Campaign with an A.
Yeah. Okay. So go to the Capital Campaign Pro website, but I'm just Amy, AMY at Capital, AL. campaignpro.com. Sorry, Jay, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that there are a couple of people saying it'd be great to have you back. You've been kind enough to do several sessions with us over the years. We would love to have you back, but I also want to point out that you do a lot of training, not only with a lot of others, but also through your own firm. You have sessions regularly on tough topics, including what's going on right now in the economy as a result of government decisions. So how would you, we'd love to have you back, but what would you recommend for people who want more of your training?
Yeah. So there's tons of free resources, and we do regular webinars on the Capital Campaign Pro site. So I'm going to type in Capital, hold on, into the chat, /emergency, capitalcampaignpro.com/emergency is what we're doing on these uncertain times and funding issues, a series in February. There's one this Monday and next Monday. capitalcampaignpro.com/emergency. Okay, there it is.
And in addition to that, you will find that there are a couple of recordings of sessions that Amy has conducted in the Philanthropy Mastermind series on the DonorSearch YouTube channel. So you can look them in there and search for them. But I do want to encourage you to look her up and follow her work, because obviously she's making such a contribution to the field. And I also want to just a quick highlight for folks that on the PM podcast, we have Sharice Harrison, who is the president-elect of APRA, talking about her love letter to Washington, and dropping this Friday a conversation with Sarah Lamaline, who's the CEO of Philanthropy Together. Plus, on the front lines of social good, we have Alan Clayton coming up next week, talking about his new book, Great Fundraising Organizations. And you can catch past editions of that show, which is held every Tuesday at 1 p.m., including the conversation we had with Paul Clolery, again, talking about this emergency work. He's the editor of the Nonprofit Times. So you can catch that once again at the DonorSearch YouTube channel. And then next week on How to Raise, which is the CFRE accredited series, we have Natalie Root, who's the founder and CEO at the Root Agency, talking about, so you need to raise dollars and fast, now what? Which should be a good companion to this, probably that, and then your campaign, as Amy has been sharing with us, you need to plan for your campaign. You can't just do that every whip stitch, but you've certainly given us a lot to work with to prepare for the big stuff. Amy, thank you so much. We really do appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. All right.
And
Thanks, everybody.
And thanks everybody there. Please join us next time and please fill out your survey.
Bye. Thanks, Susie.